Is there a better way to make money than a song that keeps making money while you sleep? Than a tune that lives on after the person who wrote it dies? Paul McCartney is one of the few artists whose very presence changed music in a way that changed the soul, not just the notes and lyrics. His songs like Hey Jude, Let It Be, and Blackbird became the soundtrack of a century. Yesterday was the most covered song in history. His bass and piano played music that moved generations, and his impact on stage and in the bank account seems impossible to touch. His net worth is now thought to be $1.2 billion, making him one of the richest people in the world. Important artist in history. His business is spread out all over the world, and he is arguably the richest recording artist. A beautiful home in London on Cavendish Avenue that was once a place where the Beatles wrote many of their famous songs. He still likes to get away to the peace and quiet of his large Sussex farm. A fancy Hamptons home on the coast of the United States that has been kept as a living memorial to Linda, and an apartment in Manhattan that makes you feel alone in the middle of all the noise of the city. Private jets, art collections worth millions of dollars, and old Aston Martins and Rolls Royces are just outside these gates. Each one was not only a sign of wealth, but also a monument to music. His story isn't just a myth. He keeps the music of today alive. The architect who made sadness into music, music into anthems, and anthems into a touring company with publishing rights and a catalog that gets more valuable every year. He stood where almost no one else does, not just on top of the world, but in the middle of its beat, its rebellion, and its beauty. Every verse is a deposit, every chorus a bond, and every phrase a thread that weaves our lives together. Don't forget to like before we start. One little way to show your respect for this amazing artist whose songs have helped many of us get through hard times. There was only a barefoot boy standing in the ruins of post-war England, holding ideas he couldn't yet name. This was before the mansions in Sussex, the Hamptons estate with its view of the Atlantic, and the billion-dollar catalog of songs that still make him money while he sleeps. Paul McCartney was born in Liverpool on June 18, 1942. At the time, the city had been bombed by the Germans and people were hungry and hiding in the rubble. His family didn't live in luxury. They lived in a small terrace house in the Allerton district at 20 Forthland Road, where they were crowded together. That house didn't have any jewels or other comforts. There were no cars or grand pianos, just the fragile wealth of hope and honor in the form of music, which was the only thing the family had left behind. Mary, his mother, was a nurse whose hands brought both health and exhaustion. She was the center of their lives. His dad, Jim, was a jazz singer with an old upright piano. He didn't have much money, but he had rhythm, and he was determined to give his kids notes when he couldn't give them coins. For Paul, the first things that were most important were not toys or trips, but the sound of music being played during meals, laughter being woven into nights of worry, and the persistent echo of piano keys fighting against quiet. But when Paul was only 14 in 1956, the delicate balance fell apart. Mary was told she had breast cancer and she was gone in a few weeks. One minute she was there and the next she was gone, Paul whispered decades later. The boy's sadness had left his voice, but it had not. Not only did that loss take away a mother, it also took away safety. It left such a deep hole in his soul that it came back years later in the eerie refrain of Let It Be. The Mother Mary who came to him in dreams wasn't a biblical figure at all. She was the resurrection of the woman whose absence had become the building blocks of his soul. After she died, Jim raised Paul and Michael, his younger brother, as his own. With quiet strength, he turned sadness into song and hopelessness into rhythm. Without realizing it, he turned Paul into a genius by teaching him rhythm and telling him to try out every instrument he could get his hands on. Paul didn't listen to music for fun. Air was there. It helped me. Years later, he said, "Music saved me." He knew that without it, the silence of loss might have swallowed him whole. The small house on Forthland Road that used to be filled with sobs soon became the site of the start of a change. Along the way, Paul met John Lennon, a boy with the same wound who had also lost his mother too soon. Paul was 15 years old at the time. With guitars in hand, they turned sadness into harmony and absence into songs while sitting on threadbare sofas. The first songs the Beatles wrote were written on worn-out floors to fill the void left by loss. When two broken boys tried to sing louder than their ghosts, it turned into a fire that would one day light the whole world on fire. In 1995, the National Trust fixed up 20 Forthland Road and kept all of the wallpaper and simple furniture, making it official that it was the start of a movement that would change music history forever. It's holy ground for millions of fans. But for Paul, there's still more to it. very scary, that he didn't get his incredible wealth from being rich or famous, but from being alone, from being sad, and from seeing an empty chair where his mother used to sit. His life wasn't background. It was the forge. Poor people, loss, and strength gave him the raw ingredients he used to build not only songs but also an empire. That's why Paul McCartney's childhood is more than just memorable. It will never die. Fame didn't come with a party. It began with being hungry, tired, and this smell is like the smoke from places where no one cares about you. In the late 1950s, Paul McCartney, who was only 16, wasn't yet seen as a musical genius. Instead, he was just a boy carrying a guitar that was bigger than his future. John Lennon helped them put together a band that most people thought was a joke. They were too young, too needy, and too raw. Liverpool didn't have much to offer besides poverty and ridicule. They kept going until they got to Hamburg, Germany, a city that ate dreamers and spat them out in quiet. It was not a stage in Hamburg. It was a fiery pit. The boys slept in dirty rooms behind clubs on beds that were full of lice. Their heads were buzzing with neon lights that made fun of the fact that they couldn't sleep. They played sets that went on for 8 hours straight until their fingers broke and their voices got weak enough to whisper. They took cheap drugs that were passed around from person to keep going. Their young bodies were stumbling toward falling apart. They shared bits of food and bread, and they often went to bed hungry the next morning. Later, Paul would say that it wasn't the beauty of music that kept them living, but the need for it. The memory stuck with him. We played because if we stopped, we were done. Still feeling the pain of being tired. The crowds did not soften the blow. Sailors who were drunk laughed through their songs. When they stumbled, bar owners yelled insults at them, and when they got paid, it was barely enough to cover another day. It would take Paul a long time to fully understand how those nights made him feel. Even though it was hard, it made us. Either you had to give up or play through the pain. So they played. Through the hunger, the shame, and the nights that seemed to go on forever. What the colleges taught in comfort, while Hamburg drilled out of desperation. Sad to say, tragedy hit again just as the band was starting to become strong. Stuart Sutcliffe, their first partner, Paul's close friend and John's soulmate, died of a brain bleed in April 1962. He was only 21 years old. Stuart used to pick art over music, giving up his bass for a painting. Still, he was there at every practice, and his laughter was a part of their early days. His death took away more than just a bandmate. It tore a hole in who they were. It was another terrible thing for Paul. His own sadness coming back to him, the thought of how suddenly his mother had died 6 years before. When Stuart's mother, Millie, buried her only son, she cried so hard that she couldn't stop. In her grief, Paul saw a reflection of his own childhood loss. It felt like all the air in the room had gone. Paul would later say that the image was still bothering him years or even decades later. Paul was put in a part he didn't want in that moment of silence. Stuart used to carry the bass guitar, but now it was his. I didn't want to play bass at all. He said it was like being pushed to the back. Still, a change grew out of that unwilling sacrifice. Paul started to think of the bass not as something in the background, but as voice lines that sang as clearly as tunes. This turned rhythm into poetry and changed the sound of rock forever. Because he was angry, he carved beauty. He made an idea out of loss. What people will one day call talent wasn't born into wealth. It was born out of need. It came about because people in Hamburg were hungry, teasing about Liverpool, the empty chair where his mother used to sit, and the grave of a friend who died too soon. You couldn't just be talented and be in the Beatles. They were built on wounds, long nights that wouldn't break them, and the will to keep going even when things looked hopeless. Paul McCartney was at the center of it all. A boy who wrote about every loss he had and used each note as a bridge strong enough to hold not only himself, but also a whole generation. Money was never the first way to measure Paul McCartney's wealth. It had songs cut into it, songs that kept making money while he slept, songs that lived on after them.